Alrighty, everyone. We're gonna get started. Hello, how's everyone doing? Woo! Welcome to the Human Change House. Today, we make history as one of the greatest issues to face humanity is brought to the world stage at the World Economic Forum. The big question is, how will technology impact the development and the minds of our next generation? Now, many of you in this room have probably heard the term climate change. What I like to say is that human change is the climate change of our minds. And we must do something about it. And that's why we're here today. My name is Larissa, and I'm the founder and executive director of HalfTheStory. I started asking this question 10 years ago, and our organization is on a mission to empower the next generation through education, advocacy, and research. Before we get started today with some of the brightest scientists and leaders around the world tackling this issue, I want us to ironically turn our attention to the screen to a quick introduction about what human change really means.
Why not?
You want to go play football? Dad, let's go play football. Why not?
Every time.
Just give it to him, Mum. Why not?
Wow, I don't know about you guys, but that gave me chills. And you might have seen in there that the average child is spending about 8 hours a day behind their screen. And then you saw the girl whose birthday, and she was 30 years old. 8 hours a day is 30 years of your life behind a device. Now, I'd like to welcome our esteemed panelists. First, Dr. Michael Rich, the mediatrician, the founder of the Boston Digital Wellbeing Lab in the Boston Children's Hospital. Dr. Stacy Drury, who's the chief psychiatrist at the Boston Children's Hospital. Dr. Mitch Prinstein, who is the Chief Science Officer of the American Psychological Association and the co-director of the Winston Lab at Chapel Hill. Next, Dr. Jim Winston, who has spent over 30 years as an addiction psychologist and is also the trustee of the Winston Family Foundation. And last, but certainly not least, so I do not want to mess this up, Dr. Guy Bernstein is the Technology, Privacy, and Policy Professor of Law at Seton Hall, University School of Law. Well, let's start with the facts. How did we get here? It starts with the devices. In America last year, social media companies made over $11 billion off of advertising revenue from minors. And when you look at the global picture, there are over 200 million adolescents living with a mental health disorder. How do we connect the dots between these devices and what is happening in their young minds? So first, Mitch, I want to pass this to you. Outside of publishing the first APA recommendation on adolescents and social media use this year, you are also co-directing one of the only labs in the world that is actually looking at brain imagery and longitudinal studies of how devices impact young people. What is it about the way that these devices are designed that makes these young children particularly vulnerable?
Thanks. Well, it's really important to know that the adolescent brain is, of course, developing as we move from childhood into adolescence, but it's not all regions of the brain developing at the same exact time. The first region of the brain that's changing is an area that makes us hypersensitive, craving as much social feedback and input and reward as we can get. But the part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, that's kind of the brain's brakes, that doesn't fully develop until about 12, 15 years later. So we've got this time, fortunately the time when most get their devices, that we have kids who are very interested in getting lots of social feedback, but not as good a way of stopping themselves from pursuing that. And we can talk later about the ways in which in the devices and in the platforms, there may be design features built in to really exploit and capitalize on that biological vulnerability.
Exactly what you said. We have no speed bumps in the digital world, but how do we create them with these features? And is there, I mean, I'm just interested, and I'm sure everyone is here, is it the like button? Is it the algorithm? Is it the speed in which these children are receiving information? Or is it really an amalgamation of all of those things?
You know, back in the prehistoric times when I was a child, if you went home from school and you wanted to spend time with a friend, you might call them on the phone. We had what's called a busy signal, and you weren't able to interact with your friends. So you had to engage in creative thinking. You had to interact with your parents, God forbid. You had to figure out your own coping skills if you were dealing with a problem. But right now, the devices give kids 24/7 contact with their peers for any possible thing that they want to discuss. And the companies seem to be interested in maximal engagement on the platforms. And we can see in the data that there's some evidence to suggest that's working.
Yeah.
The neural circuitry that's involved in responses to social media kinds of cues are the same neural circuits that are involved in dependency on illegal substances. When you use the DSM criteria to look at dependency on illegal substances, we find that over 50% of kids report at least one symptom of either dependency, tolerance, or withdrawal symptoms. So we are finding that kids are uniquely attached to these devices and platforms in a way that might be really challenging for them to create a barrier in the way that we used to when we didn't have these devices or platforms.
Well, now it's going to get interesting because you, oh, go ahead.
I just want to.
I'm going next.
So I think we can all recognize that these devices are not neutral. They're always pulling for your time. And so I'm a clinician, and I've done a lot of developmental work. And I was clinical supervisor of an adolescent sex offender treatment program. So every kid in our treatment program who had been convicted of some sort of sex crime had either been the recipient of some sexual violence or witnessed it. So if you think about what they have been exposed to, then that's what they generally act out. So if you couple that in, I don't mean to become too much of a nerd here, but with the whole notion of attachment theory and where your attachment goes, where your attention goes, your attachment grows, and it's supposed to be historically to parents and caretakers, right? And human thriving, there's a lot of research about healthy attachments to parents, caretakers over the span of 14, 16, 18 years puts a platform down for kids to have all the qualities that we think about, resilience. Now, my concern as a clinician and also a dad of 2 boys, kids are spending 8, 9 hours a day attaching through a screen. And I would suggest that it's having neurobiological consequences. There's a limitless supply of stimulation. These devices, in my opinion, are built, designed to be hyper-stimulating. How many of you seen a 2-year-old throwing a tantrum and handed a phone and instantly they quiet down? It's an artificial way of soothing, and all those ingredients that as a psychologist I understand are now being sort of done through a screen. And to me, I think it has huge implications for how the brain develops over the term.
That is so important what you just brought up about the simulation of self-soothing and how that is impacting the way that the next generation is not really even able to engage with their emotions or really cope with them, which is one of the main reasons that they stay behind their devices, because oftentimes they're running away from their things that they're feeling. But back to my very exciting question, which I wanted to pose to this group, is that within this human change, there are really 2 camps of thought. One is digital addiction, that technology is much like a substance, a drug, cigarettes, and otherwise. And then there's the camp of digital well-being, which looks at technology more as a social determinant of public health, like food, something that you need to live and you can't completely give up. I know that we have multiple perspectives here today, and I'd love to hear from all the panelists here, from the many years of work and research and what you've done, what term you align with, but not just the term, but how we name this actually, what that does for the solutions, for the problems that we're facing.
So I'll start. I will say that, so I'm a child psychiatrist. I've been practicing child psychiatry for 25 years because I am obsessed with children and babies in particular. And I love watching babies interact with parents. And I love watching that back and forth, that serve and return, that is so incredibly important to the scaffolding upon which they build social emotional regulation. So I'm going to ask all of you one question. How many of you have texted somebody or read an email in the last 10 minutes? It's okay, you can be honest, right? How many of you are here because you have children? Okay. So children learn from their parents and their caregivers. I love when you mentioned attachment because that is so critically important. They learn and they model our behavior, right? And they turn out they're smarter than us. And so I wish that I could tell you that we had the capacity to lock down social media. I wish we had that skill, right? But there are people in this room learning how to manage this with their kids, and you're here because of kids, or you're here because of some other really important reason that's tugging on your heartstrings, because this is not a typical conversation. And it's going to be challenging for you not to text during this or look at an email. And so we have to learn how to create a world in which, just like everything else that has both good and bad, teach kids at the right developmental age the appropriate capacity to regulate it, and we stand by their side and we give them positive rewards. We say, wow, that was really good, you put your phone down before me. And we try to make sure that the positive reinforcement outweighs the negative reinforcement. So if you guys want to learn something about human behavior, intermittent positive reinforcement is the best way to get a behavior to be entranced, particularly in kids. So if you are a parent, how many of you tell your child, great job, congratulations, that was cool, more times than you tell them no each day? Okay, good. You get it, right? If we shift the ratio, we have to do that because you guys are sitting right here, right? Yeah, and you guys know that in order for you to succeed, to take over the world and be better global leaders, right? Because we need a lot better regulation at the top. Then we're going to have an interface with it. And so it is about the change that is happening in our kids' brains, ensuring that we do it in a way that gives them the skill set to manage the world we have created for them. And oh, by the way, it's good for us to act the way too. Because our ability to hug people, like you guys are all here in person, right? The amount of dopamine and oxytocin that is released when you physically hug somebody is substantially higher than when you are getting a like on social media. So our physical social connectedness is the biggest, most powerful buffer that we have. And so we just have to change that ratio.
So I want to talk about your question about digital addiction versus another term. And I think it's a really important question because there are some kids who are clearly addicted. We all know these often boys who play games into the night and are failing out of school, sometimes are sent to rehab. That sounds like addiction. But many of us act like we're addicted. I mean, for me, I remember once going to work without my phone, discovering I left my phone at home. I couldn't go home and get it. I was anxious all day. I ended up going home early because I could not stand it anymore. And the thing is, many of us qualify for that. Now, as a law professor and somebody who thinks about policy, I'm worried about calling it digital addiction because even though people get it better, it means that we are to blame. And I don't think that we are to blame. I think this is pretty common knowledge at this point, that the technology industry basically uses different manipulations in order to make sure we are online for as long as possible. And they do that because that is the business model that existed since the beginning of the internet. We get Gmail for free, we get Facebook for free, but we do pay. Pay with our data, and we also pay with our time. And the thing is, for as long as this is the prevailing business model, tech companies will keep coming up with different manipulations to keep us online for longer. So for that reason, I prefer calling it technology overuse or some other term that shows that we're not responsible, but somebody else is.
Can I add to that?
Yes.
Well, the fact that I'm the founder and director of something called the Digital Wellness Lab will kind of give you an idea of where I fall on this one. And I want to extend what Gaia just said. And I think one of the difficult things about the term addiction, which is, by the way, not a medical term at all, it's a social term, is because of the way we look at addiction and addicts. And I think not only is person to blame, but it shifts the blame to the device and allows the person to be helpless, which I don't believe. You know, Dr. Jury's crazy about babies. I'm crazy about teenagers, mainly because they have so much opportunity, they have so much potential. And I think the moment you talk about addiction, it gets everybody off the hook. And the kids that I see, and I've been treating kids who've kind of gone down the rabbit hole of social media, of gaming, what we call information binging, which is like endless blogs, endless YouTube, etc. We don't call it addiction, and in fact, we don't even see it as a diagnosis so much as a syndrome, a collection of symptoms, of behaviors that are driven by underlying needs, whether it be attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Kids on the autism spectrum are more vulnerable to this as well. Depression and anxiety play a huge role in it. And as Guy has said, this is, or maybe it was you, it was one of you two down there, talked about self-soothing, right? So the problem is not the device or the application so much as it's their attempt to soothe themselves. It's their attempt to feel better about these underlying drivers, if only to distract themselves from it. But one of the really, instrumental things here is that when you go online, you are the master of it. You go where you want to go. You know, admittedly, there are lots of cues to go that. But one of the things that I see in teenagers, we all talk about FOMO, and we're probably all guilty of FOMO at some level or another. With teenagers, even more powerful is what we're calling faux blow, fear of being left out, fear that if we don't respond to that text or that posting or like something, that people will forget about us, that we will be presumed to be ghosting them, right? And you know, kids actually measure how they feel over how many likes they get and how long it takes for them to get those likes. And they will actually pull down a post if it doesn't get enough likes fast enough, right? And so they are more invested in their image than they are in themselves.
Yes.
And one of the things that that I'm really and you know what Larissa is talking about her HalfTheStory project is really, really important, because what these kids are doing with social media in particular is marketing themselves to the world. They are not being authentic. They're showing the best of themselves, their best look, or their hot new boyfriend, or their dad's new sports car, the vacation they were on. And so other kids come to social media to connect, and they feel less than because they know their whole selves. They know the other half of the story.
And
exactly,
there is a difference between connecting and connection. And that is one of the most important things that we must harness, not only as adults, but also when we think about the next generation, as our connection or connections or lack thereof are the determinant of health in our life. But Mitch, you have something to say about this, so I would love to hear your perspective.
To follow up on what you're both saying, you know, I think, you know, why does the adolescent brain make us hypersensitive to social signals when we're 10 or 11? It's to form connection.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason, every day you have many different relationships that you're involved in, as a parent, as a partner, as a coworker, as a child. So many relationships, and those relationships are incredibly complex. In fact, none of us has them all figured out, right? We learn in adolescence how to engage in those relationships. It's a really important time when we start learning not just to go over to someone's house and play, but to actually engage in disclosure, emotional vulnerability, conflict, and resolution. I think one of the things that's important in this conversation about the use of devices and social media is that for every minute that a child is using it, they're not learning those other skills. And that's what's important. Now, the devices and the platforms are there to foster relationships, but they're different kinds. They're connecting, as you say. When you log in, it tells you you have a certain number of people who have followed you or liked you. Not who they are, not what their interests are, not even their names, just a number. You know, the endless scroll is designed to keep you engaged. The like button is designed for that dopamine hit, but very little says that we should form relationships or we should take the time off to foster actual interpersonal interaction. It's for that reason our research finds that in the immediate hour after kids get off of social media, they report feeling more lonely, not more connected. So we're actually in a situation where the brain is developed to teach us one thing, and social media has reduced complex, nuanced, complicated relationships to a few characters and the presence or the absence of a thumb button. And that's not what our very sophisticated brains are capable of doing. So we're missing an important learning experience.
Well, and I'll add to that. My sense is that there's an evolutionary protocol. Our brains have been around, hardware, for depending on 30,000 years, 300,000 years. And it's supposed to evolve with particular input. And my understanding of it is that it's visceral input. It's touch, eye contact, reading facial expressions. And now that those connecting sort of dynamics are online, you miss all of that. And I think that's having a very deleterious impact on the developing brain. I think that that's part of why the anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation are skyrocketing, because kids are now, they can avoid the difficult when they say something that pisses somebody off, where they say something that hurts someone else. it's a whole register physiologically in the other person, and there's a way that they get to avoid that, and I think it's to the detriment of, I don't know what to call it, Alzheimer's. It is a human condition, and I think we're seeing that in the rise in social anxiety. Kids are uncomfortable not being able to just leave a situation and push off.
Well, when you distill humanity down to a metric of engagement, or we ourselves, or tech is free for you because you are the product, it changes the value system of a society. And at this point where AI is taking the stage, and a lot of these things that required the human brain no longer require the human brain, what will it look like, prioritize or not, the opportunity cost of efficiency, which might be emotional connection. Now, one of the biggest questions that I have for all of you here is, we talk a lot about social media and likes and TikTok, but that's not all of social media. Netflix is a form of social media. YouTube video is a form of social media. Is every screen the same? And does every screen have the same type of impact? And do we even have the research to tell that story?
Well, actually, we've done research looking first at the risk of obesity in screens, because that was an issue back in the days of television. People were concerned about the couch potato and the kid becoming fat, stupid, and violent in front of the television. And they are not all the same, but they're not all the same for different reasons. For example, with the obesity issue, quite interestingly, when we looked by screen at what kind of pushed the overweight thing, it was only television. It was none of the other screens. And if you think about it, what's the difference between watching television and playing games on social media, etc.? No, you're passive in those. Your hands are free. So what do we do with our hands when we watch TV? Exactly. And we eat high stimulus foods, high fat, salt, sugar. And because we don't want to be interrupted, we grab the whole bag of Doritos or the whole tub of ice cream, and we eat it absent our hunger and satiety cues. We are eating to stimulate, not to sate ourselves. And I think that that's really, really important. And I think the same thing happens with the connection issue. We have, because in general, all of us, but particularly adolescents, are acutely self-conscious. Right? You wanna feel like you're okay. And so it is much easier to not expose yourself by using a screen. We've traded away we've traded away our deep and sustained and meaningful connectedness with each other in deep ways where we can talk to each other about things that matter for near infinite connectivity. And just as Jim said, this is really, it's easier that way. The problem is that the feedback is relatively attenuated, relatively weak, and we are lonely. We are alone, and we feel less than after we do it.
I just want to add one little piece in about the child mental health care crisis and the regular mental health care crisis. While I would love to say that we had a single cause, social media didn't cause it. Stigma, systematic disinvestment in growing healthy, thriving children, an artificial separation between physical and mental illness, which addiction kind of spans part of. That is what has driven our mental health care crisis. In the United States, 12 kids a day are dying by suicide. It has now changed the life expectancy of children ages 1 to 19 to be going down as of 2022. And the things that are doing that are exactly our child mental health care crisis. And this began in the early 2000s and is disconnected temporally from COVID and from social media. So it's really important that we recognize that we have an entire generation of children where 1/3 of them globally is struggling with symptoms of depression and anxiety. And social media is not going to fix that problem, but for some kids it is a lifeline. It is what has kept them alive. And so I want to be really thoughtful that our multiple pronged solution has to include social media, and it also has to address stigma. And it has to strengthen the science so that we can do a better job caring for mental illness than we are doing currently.
And I'm sorry, I didn't
Maybe
mean to
interrupt
interrupt.
her.
Yeah, right. But to inject a note of hope here, social media and the digital ecosystem writ large are actually a huge opportunity for us to make change.
Mhm.
I truly believe that if we can stop using social media to market ourselves, to pretend we're more than we are, we're something attractive, and start to be authentic the way we are with our true friends, they know us, warts and all. They know our fears, our limitations, our strengths, and our weaknesses. And they don't love us despite them. They love us because of them, because we complement each other. Because none of us is perfect and we connect in deep, meaningful ways. So one of my true fantasies is that if we can learn to use social media right, it could be an instrument of peace. I could see a kid in Gaza and a kid in Israel connecting with each other, and they're being told by their adults, hate that person. They say, screw you, right? Because I know this kid more than I know you. But that's my fantasy.
Well, and a big part of what social media breeds is this negativity, is this war, is the echo chambers that we all live in, and we have to break through them, but we also have to change the way in which these platforms are designed. Now, globally, and we have a number of other policies and policymakers later this week talking about different solutions in different places around the world, but it's an uphill battle. This is one of the only issues where there's a handful of people that own companies, and we cannot come to a global consensus about how to fix this. Climate change, of course, there's thousands of different things contributing to this, but this is actually much more simple if we would all just get in the same room. Now, not only in America, but globally, there are many different ways to think about what about the platforms needs to change. In some, there's ultimately three main things. One is more privacy. The second is algorithmic or infrastructure change, so the walls of how the house is built to make sure it's safe. And then there's the content or the pictures on the wall. What I'm curious from all of you here is, where do you think we should begin, and what do you think is the most effective based on your research, but also your experience in working with policymakers, as all of you, and maybe Gaia, you start here because we didn't get you on the last question, and where do we go? Where do we begin?
So I think first of all, the most important thing is time. Because if you spend less time on your screen, you're exposed to fewer things you should not see. Now, time and data and privacy are very much connected because they're part of the same business model. So basically, if you enact laws to limit data collection, you are making the whole business model less lucrative because advertising are going to be less targeted. So it makes less sense to try to get people's time. So I think the goal, even though I think the most important thing is to make sure people are not spending so much time on the screen, I think that data and time are equal. The issue of content moderation obviously has big implications, but I think you won't have such a big problem if people are not on their screens 8 hours a day.
Yeah, Mitch.
The American Psychological Association put out a health advisory after reviewing the research in this area about the things that we thought we can say so far and where we think there are some areas ripe for change. I think we arguably I don't know anyone that would disagree that we need to take down cyber hate, and we need to take it down immediately. Discriminatory posts that are actually helping kids learn how to engage in maladaptive behavior, teaching them how to cut themselves and hide it from their parents, teaching them how to engage in weight-related or restriction behaviors and hide that from adults. This should be taken down immediately. We know that the endless scroll and the like button are designed to maximize engagement. It's an interesting thought experiment to wonder for a second, if you change the business model from maximal engagement to improving child mental health, what could be done with these platforms, right? What could you do if you are helping to reinforce pro-social interactions, connection, a sense of spreading kindness and empathy? There was an interesting experiment that adolescents started themselves about being their authentic selves. It was called Finsta, where adolescents were
Exactly, and that's what the senators are worried about, and it's actually a good thing.
Don't get me started on the U.S. senators, but yeah, there was absolutely a need that came from adolescents organically to say we want to be our authentic selves. Take down the like counts, take down the like button, take down the algorithm. An interesting study done in the United States demonstrating that if a new profile was made on TikTok, the experimenters identified themselves as a 13-year-old female. Within 30 minutes, she was fed content teaching her how to restrict her eating in a way consistent with anorexia. 30 minutes, just from artificial intelligence, only by identifying her age and her gender.
Just to add to this, basically Meta did research years ago identifying 50 areas which they knew affects kids' negative self-perception. But they also knew something else. They knew this makes kids stay online for longer. So they didn't do anything until last week. Last week they decided to try to change this. Why? Because there was so much pressure from lawsuits, from coming legislation. They could have done this 2-3 years ago.
Well, not coincident. Yeah.
It's important to know that when kids who go online, after a certain period of time, you're not choosing anything; it's being chosen for you.
Yeah.
And that ownership issue, at least as an addiction guy, is critical to any relationship. Are you in charge of your relationship? Like, I'm a coffee addict. You come between me and coffee, and it's very hard. But other than that, and I'm aware of that, but for kids who have limited ability to regulate, these devices offer so many ways for them to get hyper engaged. We all know the platforms push to the darker edges because that grips kids more. They're more stimulated, and it's harder for them to get off. And then they go to darker and darker places. So I think that issue of ownership, the kids are being fed stuff. They're not choosing the material for the most part.
And
I would love to jump in here with what Mitch was saying too, is the Finsta experiment, which is really important. And I think you'll all catch that I'm an optimist. It's an occupational hazard of being a pediatrician, which is that we are hopeful for the kids all the time. And this is a perfect example of it. And I think that what we can do with the AI that is currently driving them to darker and darker places because it appeals to their primitive survival skills, is that we can change that AI to select for emotional wellness.
Yeah.
And that can be done. That is a coding issue.
Mm-hmm.
That is not a human issue in the sense that there's a problem with the person. That is an algorithmic thing that can be changed.
And it's a systems and a financial issue because what would the world look like instead of saying, hey, we're going to charge you, tax spent over $70 million in the US lobbying against policies last year. What would it look like to say, hey, here's a tax incentive because you allowed algorithmic agency. You said, hey, Lars, you're looking at eating disorder content. You're struggling with this. You can reset your algorithm so that you have more agency. What would the world look like if we flipped the script?
Well, and that's what some legislation in the States is talking about. We're 2 signatures away from COSA being passed on the week that Facebook made that decision. I'm not making a connection, I'm just saying that seemed to happen in the same week. But I think that's right. I think that the experience of an 8-year-old on these platforms should not be the same as the experience of an 80-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
Period. I can't buy any toy for my child without a package insert that indicates that it's not safe. And for many of them, there's very clear messaging about how to make it developmentally appropriate. These are platforms that were built for adults, and now children are using it. Children with immature brains. And that is concerning. Not only that, but we now have research showing that the use of these platforms and devices is actually changing the way that the brain grows. It's changing the size of the brain, and it's also changing which areas of the brain are becoming hyper-developed and which areas of the brain are not developing as much as they should. The fact is, I'm not a business person, obviously, but money or not, we shouldn't be making a profit on children's brains. we can all be doing something about it. Shut off the phones at 9 o'clock. In my house, they all go on top of the refrigerator at 9 o'clock. My kids' brains are more important than making somebody else money. And I know that they need that sleep, that 8 hours at least, because without 8 hours of sleep, it's going to change the size of their brains.
So, with all of that being said, and I think what you're going to say is going to apply to this, because we're almost at the end of questions. Everything is changing right here, right now. AI is right here. I talked to a dad a week ago. His son was put in the wrong room. A deep fake was made about him. They had people outside their house threatening to kill him, and it intercepted every single one of his college applications, making a deep fake of him saying something he never said. Everything is changing. It's no longer a mean comment or a bad photo. This is all unfolding, and we don't even know the answer. So, as you all are in the research space, because a lot of the policies that are on the line right now aren't even relevant within the last year, what do you think is going to happen with AI? Is it going to be worse? Is it going to be better? I think there are both sides of the coin, as we spoke about a lot about earlier. But we're talking so much about the financial and the business implications, but what about the implications for the child?
So I want to say really clearly, as a clinician, I'm worried.
Yeah.
And I'm worried because I'm married to a lawyer, so everything in the legal world takes forever. I don't have that kind of time. I have a 720 person wait list at Boston Children's Hospital to come into child mental health care. I will say 20% of my visits to my emergency room for acute psychiatric care are because of escalations that led to physical aggression over social media and cell phones. So I want to really push hard on this yes and, meaning we do have to do these changes. We do have to force digital companies to be incorporating this into their business models. And most importantly, we have to support parents. We have to build a cultural norm shift, because I don't have time to wait for 5 years or 10 years or for the UN to agree on something. I don't have that kind of time because I'm losing kids every day. And so part of this is human change has to start with each and every one of us, that we have to share that. And most importantly, and I keep looking at you guys, and I'm so sorry because I'm not that can't be fun. But we need your agency too, right? So one of the ways we're going to protect kids is to give them the skills and the agency
And the power.
to do that, and the inhibitory control.
Yeah.
Guy, do you want to close
For
this out?
me?
Yeah. Let's have Guy go, and then.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think one of the problems with AI is that it gets out of control. So even if a company decides we're going to build better algorithms, it basically teaches itself different lessons and it changes. So one of the most important laws that's been introduced that Mitch mentioned is the idea that companies have to go through evaluation of harms every year. And they have to assess whether what's happening with the algorithms every year, because otherwise they would not know. Even if they set out with good intentions, it may be different. And I think that's a big thing that we need to keep in mind.
Yes, intention versus impact. Yes, and do you want to close it out?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'm piling on with Stacey's yes and. I am an optimist, I said, and I think it depends on all of us here in this room today to talk to the world's leaders that are gathered around us all week long. We can do this. This is not about us and them. This is about us and us. And we can do this simply by showing that we care and showing that that will benefit their business model. Because they are not tobacco, which is a product that's toxic when used as directed. This is a product that can actually change the world in very positive ways if we use it in caring human ways.
Well,
and you guys are going to change the world because we've screwed it up.
And you are the change. You should have been teaching all of us up here. But
Absolutely.
anyways, so thank you all to our brilliant panelists. Now, I saw a lot of amazing facial expressions in here, and I'd love to open it up. Margaret, did you want to speak? Okay. We have questions, so ask your question. Please share your name and what country or affiliation you're from.
Should I?
Margarita, the founder herself.
Yay!
No, my question is, which I asked many people, and I ask also for tech industry this question: why our children need social media? Why do they need this connection? And the social media answer was to be connected and to be prepared for digital world. So my question was to be connected with whom? With their parents, with their friends from the school, or to be connected with people, children in Africa, in Asia. And this question, social media said, the children have the right to be connected, finish, not only sexual. And preparing for them for digital world, this was again as a second answer. So I'm still asking, we are speaking here about such big risks for each child and for our society. Risks are huge. What is the advantage of children to be in social media? I still didn't get it. I was listening to you and I heard only one thing. For some children who are by being born maybe as a, having difficulties to speak with other children directly, for them it's a good. But firstly, probably there are not so many such clinical cases. And secondly, maybe these children need even more to be connected personally, to learn, to force themselves. I mean, I can speak about my own son, the first one. He is a one who prefers not to be personally connected. He prefers to be connected digitally. And I was so stupid that I said to myself, okay, I was born like that too. I remember being a child, I prefer to be somewhere in the corner and not to be with other children. I felt much better to speaking to myself than to somebody else. But my fate didn't allow me to do this. My fate was pushing me always in the middle of the children. I hated it, but I had to do it. I had to speak. And only later I understood that I was lucky. Because by the nature, I'm probably autist. I prefer to be alone. But my son was the same, and I said to myself, oh my God, if I felt so bad, being surrounded, being pushed to learn how to speak, he can be very lucky one. Yeah, don't need to push him. So he was reading, and then he was gaming, and only too late I understood that it was a mistake. I had to push him, and to do this, it is much more difficult. But we have to do it, and I still don't understand why we have to put our children in social media. What is the advantage for them? So that we are allowed ourselves to take all these risks. Again, we spoke about driving the car. This is a perfect example for me. Why we are not letting the children to drive the car with 10 years? There's a very clear, and nobody's loving about it. It would be maybe very, very good for some car industry to produce small cars, and they will have they are not daring to do it to us because it is, but they are there to tell us our children should be in social media. It is their right and our duty as a parents to give it to them. So it is. I still don't understand. I can imagine very easy the life for the children without social media. Mm-hmm. We are using it. Excuse me. I'm using this exactly as you said. 10 minutes before I was writing, but I'm using this to manage my life, how to feed my children, how to manage the company. They don't do it. They use this to lose or not to learn the life skills and just to kill the time. It is not. I don't see that we cannot because I mean some children, even I do maybe are doing all the time like that. I'm using this, and it's true. We are getting from the social media or from tech industry the message you should to have so much knowledge and information in your brain that you are always to run more and more you have to need and I said to myself to take easy decisions question before, for example, I don't know what cheese I should take for my breakfast, and it was my taste who was the only thing. Like, not today, you have a list about molecules, what are inside, chemies, it was, and of course, then you're, oh my God, I need 1 hour just to read it and to take this decision what she did. So this is what I'm speaking about the children. For us, I use it, it's a different story. Why our children should be in social media.
So I'm happy to join on that bandwagon. Kids get social media from us, right? And so just like everything, it needs to come at the right time and the right place and in the right context. And it can't be an all or none, right? But it's not with cars, right? So at cars, we give them a permit. We have 40 hours of driving time. We have ages that are set. They're set by insurance companies. Let's be clear, right? You cannot rent a car until 25 in the United States because the insurance company knew far more about risk-taking and brain development, right? And so it is absolutely that. There is a time window when kids do not need social media. And they are getting social media from parents who are frazzled, who are trying to learn to regulate their child, who didn't get that same instruction I got, which is let them cry it out, it'll help their lungs, right? We want them to go to sleep, to be able to get through these things, to be able to sit and talk with their friends at dinner. So it is absolutely something they do not need at age 2. They do not need at age 4. They do not need at age 6. They do not need probably at age 8. There's a fuzzy window that's going to come in there, right? And then we can't just flip the switch. So how many of you gave your children a sip of wine before the age of 18 or 21?
Or received one from your parents.
Okay, right? How many of you, the first time your child drank alcohol, did you give them 12 shots of tequila? You don't do that. You don't flip the switch. The child's brain is not developed to function in that way. And the child's brain is functioned to want whatever we tell them not to do, right? And so it is that graded, science-informed exposure that matches what we know about brain development, that understands this social connectedness. And we do have to be thoughtful about building it into our education system, right? So I will say my daughter is pre-med, and I'm so sorry she is pre-med as a doctor, because she is also learning a huge amount of information, more than I did, because there's the capacity to do all of these online. They watch them at 1.5 speed, which is why I don't record my lectures anymore, because I sound like Alvin and the Chipmunks, which is not a good way to learn about child psychiatry. But we do have to be very thoughtful. We need the science and the relationship between our education systems to match the neurobiology of child-human brain development. And then we need to protect parents. And I'm going to use the example of McDonald's, right? Why do people go to get fast food? Well, 1, because they need food. 2, because french fries are really designed to be tasty. And 3, because they didn't have the funds, the money, or the time to create a healthy meal, right? And then we put them right next to poor neighborhoods. And we need to be very thoughtful about not creating that same system. And then we took fast food and we put it into cultures and companies and places that didn't have access to fast food before, and we radically changed obesity and diabetes. And so we need to be using those models and making sure we don't make the same mistakes.
Thank you, Dr. Stacey. We have another question. I just want to make sure that we will all be around for the rest of the night and the rest of the week. So if you didn't get a question answered, we can continue that. But yeah.
So to parlay put your question with your answer, the one big thing that we haven't discussed today, I'm the mean mom. I was going to give my kid a phone until she got a car, because I thought then you need a phone if it breaks down, right?
But don't use it while you're driving.
But we have some great school systems, and they gave them all pads. And they encourage them to use social media to do their homework. They all have WhatsApp group-based homework.
Yeah.
And I began to realize that my 12-year-old, 13-year-old basically already had a phone. It was just a tablet. And I tried turning off, I was turning off the internet at our home at a certain hour, and I can't, because it's got a phone like built in. And I can't limit screen time because they actually have homework school books now in their tablet. That I can't take it away for them to study. I have society fighting me to get my kid more on the screen. And then my son, he's kind of shy, doesn't like, we had this thing in the house recently, he doesn't like being around real people so much because it's so much better when you text, because you can get a text from a girl, think about it, go get a drink of water, come back, type it, think about it again, then flip through. And it's just too much stress to have to think something like on the side. And I'm like, sweetie, you get good at what you do. You know, you have to be awkward, and it is so much better to be awkward when you're 12 than when you're 22, because you're gonna go to college. You can't not be around humans so much. And we're teaching kids to be socially awkward, and because they want that time before they respond. And there are great things, because he has that amazing friend who's another student in Florida. He would have never met otherwise, and she got him into drama, which got him much more out of his shell. There are good things that have come of it, but even my husband, the reason I'm recording you guys is that
I told you so.
like, yeah, exactly. I was inspired by Israelis I know to have a fun-free day. Shabbat. And my husband fought me. We cannot have a fun-free day. You know, my husband and I are both addicted in our own weird ways as well. But the school system is fighting us to keep them there.
Supporting the providing schools.
Yeah.
So I'll address that one. You know, I have a question for every school around the world. If you are providing or encouraging technology for your students, and you are not simultaneously offering a comprehensive digital media literacy program, are you really preparing your kids to succeed in the world today? I would say no.
No.
You have to teach them about mis and disinformation. You have to teach them about bot accounts versus real accounts. You have to teach them about social comparison processes that are natural and normal when you're looking at profiles. You have to teach them about the adolescent brain and provide them an instruction manual on how to drive it, and how it's uniquely vulnerable to social media. I can go on. But I'll say that, you know, I think it's absolutely critical that we recognize that when we're actually encouraging kids' usage, especially, might I say, schools that encourage kids to submit homework assignments at midnight, not thinking that they're going to use that device to also engage in social media and gaming until that hour of the day, are we really doing what's best for children's brains? And I think that we as parents and as community members, as well as policymakers or thought leaders, need to think together about how we can change this dialogue around technology so that way we're doing it with kids' well-being put first.
Yes.
Amen.
And AI in education is trying to phase out teachers, period, where you've got Khan Academy as a high school.
Right.
Yeah.
Can I just, just one question, all of you. What would the world look like if we had more than two choices? Because everything that everyone's discussed in this room today is come down to two companies that own and enable everything you're talking about. That is Apple and Google. Two companies that own mobile tech. So they do lots of good, but they also enable everything negative that you're talking about. So in this kind of world of digital feudalism that we have now, it's about choice. It's about providing other platforms, other manufacturers, enabling choice to provide, not take it away, but to provide a better way. And that's vital, because that's the core problem and the core root cause of what we're all talking about.
We changed the market. We changed the demands of those using
Change the model.
We drive it with market forces by people who say, this is not good enough. This is not good for my child. This is not good for me.
What two companies own, what 7 billion people do other than this? Two companies.
But those 7 billion people have to remember that those billions of dollars that those two companies have started in their pockets.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
We can vote with our wallets.
Steve, yes.
Sorry, you're talking about a bottom-up push or possibly a top-down. Top-down could have happened a long time ago.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen because there's no business interest to do it.
Until we demand it.
Well, even
That's because everyone's addicted, right?
Yeah.
Or unless we change the taxing structure and say, hey, financial incentives to do this. But anyways, you have something to say.
So you change the markets, you need to change the dynamics of the market, but also there are two issues. how do we stop the control of these companies in the way they're doing things? But then there's the issue of imagination. Margarita, you asked, so why do we need social media? Because we've stopped imagining a different way to interact. And the big problem, that's the big urgency here, is that kids don't know anything different. So the only thing they can think about is interacting through social media. Who said that the only way to interact in a group is through likes and comments? But it's been going on for so long. And the thing is, kids are already brought up in a certain way, and not just kids. I teach 23, 24-year-old law students, and they raise their hand when I teach them and say, but Professor Bernstein, our generation is different. We don't want to speak to each other. We prefer to communicate differently.
I think to your point, it's not about stopping the incumbents. It's about providing more choice. You can't have two companies controlling what 7 billion people do.
There are two stages. You have to first of all change the incentives for the incumbents, and then you can provide more choice because markets
So
will
it's not about
flourish.
stopping what they're doing, it's just providing choice for those people that want to do something different.
So I want to jump in for a second. So again, in the addiction paradigm, access to a drug is critical in the development of any. So it's different from, you can't put an iPad in your pocket. Kids can carry a phone around in their pocket, right? So in some of the research, they're picking their phones up 100 times a day. 100 times a day. So on average. So think about that magnetic pull. So that's number one. I have two kids. I was a draconian parent. It was horrible for a long time. But I gave them, the oldest one got a phone when he was 14 and a half. I gave him, and this was very hard to find, one of those flip phones so he could call. He broke it so he wouldn't deliberately, because he was embarrassed to take it to school. The social milieu, to your point, the tsunami is already left the building. It's very hard. I have a photo I use in a talk of my, at that point, 10-year-old at a birthday party with 10 other boys. He's the only one not on his phone. Everybody else is on their phone. They didn't go outside. It's horrifying. But that neurobiological arc between 9 and 14, I'm trying to protect. And school, middle school, elementary school is tough enough without the access that these phones give to all kinds of flooded information coming. So
Yes, and lastly, I'm sorry, but we have to wrap up. So today's all about the kickoff to the Human Change campaign. We can all start by being a part of the change by keeping our devices in our pockets and finding a person that you don't know as a part of our networking session and to talk about it. Share your stories. Talk to our teams. Let's meet someone else where they're at, because where that learning exchange happens is where the change begins. So thank you all for being here. If you haven't looked, we have a number of conversations throughout the week, and this is just the beginning. The change starts now. Now, lastly, I'd love to invite Margarita Dreyfus up if you'd like to say a word or two. Margarita is the reason that we are all here. She has made this one of the key agendas for the world stage. So, Margarita, we are so grateful to you for making space for this important issue.
Please stay here. Stay here. The reality is a difficult to add something. After everything what was said here, difficult to add really something meaningful, except to say thank you very much for coming. I mean, I wanted to read something here, but I think that everything what I wanted to say was already said here. I just, again, our hope is for each of you to go out to this world and to try to wake up, mainly parents, to, I have 5 children. I'm speaking with, it is again, my love, it was always children. How do they develop? Well, I would say, I think many parents, they just don't understand what is going on. They just, think, okay, we grew up already with some kind of device in our hands. And so the children are driving more and more inside of the social media. It's not only the screen, which is a flashing in our eyes, but it's the message inside, which turns ethical education we've got through so many generations. One generation can forget everything what our grandparents and grandparents were teaching us, and we always thought that it is genetically we have. No, we see now it's not genetic. To care, to share. This is very easy to get out from children. Not from all, but it's enough. It's a 50% of them. It's already enough to change our society later, when the human change really will show the big impact. For me, it's interesting. One, of course, when I'm thinking about our expert and expert others in around the globe, to read more about predictions. Who are the people of the future? Not in the 100 years. Let's say in 15 years. People who grew up by digitally, not to speaking to each other, as we just said with you. Our children, many of them are born, they don't like to speak to each other. And they were pushed by the life to speak, to learn it through the childhood. They didn't have choice. Today they have this choice. So how they are going to create to impact our society? These people who are not able to speak to each other. I know personally, at least 4 families. They have son, and I don't know. It is son. Also didn't like to speak generally, and luckily had a choice. So what are they doing now? 22, 23. They are sitting in their rooms or houses or apartments. They are not going out. They don't have any friends. They don't need anymore all these likes. They are creating something, but only in digital world. They are not, and the parents are in shock. They don't know how to get out of this room. They are only ordering the food online. They are getting this. And if it would be like 20 years ago or even 10 years ago, I would say, oh my God, it's like a diagnosis. But today it's growing and growing more like a normally. So the question for me would be interesting to read more about predictions. Who are these people and what kind of society can be done by these people? And we all will see, because it will happen very quickly. But thank you very much. So this is, in order at least to start to think who are the people of the future, we should speak with everybody, with neighbors, friends. This is what I'm doing, unfortunately, many times when I start to speak about this. And people said to me, oh, you didn't like to speak as a child, you catch up. It's true. But I think the last thing what I will say, from everything what I see around me, from the children, my little girls are 7 years old. It's the age, of course, very interesting, and we have so many friends of them at home. Looking at them, I think what our children need very much is purpose. Purpose and how to give the purpose to them. Purpose is nothing about you. And in social media, it's everything about you, how you look, what you eat. In an even good projects inside, it's still about you. So I think our parents need help to teach them how to give the purpose to their own children. We lost it. By the way, we probably didn't have it even before, but it's a life to give it to them. As I say to myself always, if you didn't dig, potatoes in summer, you had nothing to eat in winter, and your family will die. So it was a life was teaching them. Today, they live in the perfect digital aquarium, where the life is so perfect. There is no purpose inside, only pleasures. But of course, we know with some age, 20 or 18, they will go to this world. And so I think parents today need a lot of help. How to teach their children purpose in this artificial world where everything's so easy.
Go enjoy!